Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Jake Purdy. Jake works with a company called Stray Dog Strength, and Jake and I are going to be talking about one of the specific products that they make called the Spring Ankle Device. We dive into that in particular today. We also talk about foot and ankle training. In addition to Jake's experience rehabbing his own shoulder, we talk about the state of physical therapy and rehab and the need to incorporate strength and conditioning principles into rehab more and so much more. A really great chat with Jake on the podcast today. I really appreciate his time, and I really love all the work that him and his company, Stray Dog, are doing. Highly recommend checking them out if you haven't already, and also highly recommend checking out our Season 5 sponsor, ISOFIT. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training and can help you and your athletes win more and hurt less. For more on ISOFIT, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Jake, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem, Dan. Thanks for the invite. Nice to meet you at the NSCA in Baltimore.
Yeah, dude, that was an awesome event, and I really like what you guys brought to that event. I think that the kind of products and the overall setup that you guys at Stray Dog can provide are very unique, and I really don't see anyone else doing what you guys do. But for people who maybe haven't seen what all you're capable of, or maybe they don't know your own backstory there, Jake, would you
Yeah.
mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great things y'all are doing?
Yeah, no problem. So Stray Dog Strength, we're a full facility equipment manufacturer located in Columbus, Ohio. We have about 200 of our own designs, and then we sell, TRX straps and Bosu balls or whatever product is out there. And then a couple of the things recently we've been getting into is we collaborated with Cal Dietz with triphasic training, and we made a product called the Spring Ankle, which I think is one of the things you were referring to seeing over there at the conference. So I'm our brand manager. My father Matt started our company back in '96, and I work with our engineering team. I have an athletic coaching degree by trade, so I'm kind of like the coach, and I take the feedback from the coaches, work with the engineering team, and we make solutions for strength coaches.
That's amazing that way. And I like that kind of concept of the strength coach mind combined with the engineering mind that way. And you're right. I do remember the spring ankle being a very unique thing that way. And I've really never seen anything quite like that before. What exactly is that for people who haven't seen it before?
Yeah, so the spring ankle series is something that Cal Dietz created, I believe, about 8 years ago. And the way he would do it traditionally would be you just basically have a floating heel off of a plate or a bench, or people would even use like DC blocks, and they would just do isometric holds. But what Cal figured is he had all these great adaptions on people because basically your foot is not trained by most programs. So your leg has all of this strength, and then you can't export all of the strength and use it all because it'll just destroy your foot or your ankle. So if you increase the strength in your foot and your ankle, you're now able to use all of that power, and you're like unlocking. It's like a limiter on a car. And as soon as you take that off, your vertical is going to increase, your speeds are going to increase, all this stuff's going to increase, but you really didn't get stronger because it's happening in a 4 to 8 week window, which we all know strength adaptations don't take place in 4 weeks. So it's very interesting device. And basically what it is, the device we've designed is at a 15-degree angle, which is the average angle that your foot strikes the ground. And then we have a bar that you rotate your heel into. So it makes it a little bit more sport specific. So, like for example, position one, you rotate your heel out, and that works on acceleration because when you run, your foot strikes and then it comes out, and then you come up to sprint. So there's basically 8 different positions, and they're all like for jumping, accelerating, decelerating, more sport specific. And it's brand new. We launched it back in April.
Yeah,
So
no, it's a very unique device, and I think you just brought up so many incredible points here. I mean, first off, I think all movement or the majority of athletic movement that I see literally starts from the ground.
yep.
And some of the strongest muscles in the body exist in the foot. And if you don't believe me, there's an article I can link into in the description that way, where we look at some of the muscles like the soleus and the flexor digitorum and the
Yep.
tensile strength of these muscles. And the soleus, the tensile strength is over 3,000 newtons, and the flexor digitorum, I forget the number right off, but it's up there. It's in the 2 or 3,000 range as well. So it's like these muscles are capable of producing significant amounts of force, more so than some of the other muscles that we often train, like the quads. And yet we completely forget about them in our training and our programming. And you're
Yep.
right. There's so much that occurs from the foot from an athletic standpoint. And we were just talking before we even got on the recording about ankle injuries and different things that way. And they're so common, yet we're not doing anything to train them or address them or really prevent them entirely. And I think that your mention about the 15-degree angle is really interesting as well, because isometric exercise, which this sounds like a mainly isometric device, is
Yep.
a 10 to 15 degree angle increment that we have effectiveness in. So if it's at 15, that says from the 0 degree to about the 30-degree range, give or take, we're basically building strength in that kind of range. So it actually gives us a pretty good window to work in that way. And our, margin of error, I guess I'll say, from a training standpoint, is larger because of that.
Yeah, one of the things that really stuck out when I visited Cal up in Minnesota to shoot some content was he was like, all of my athletes, their hands aren't supposed to be on the ground. If their hands are on the ground, they probably got their ass thrown. So the only thing that touches the ground is the feet, and we're not training the feet. So how do we train the feet? And it's really interesting because everybody sees that product and they think, oh, it's for sprinters or it's for jumpers. Well, Cal's a hockey strength coach, which not everybody knows, and they don't run. Obviously, skating is similar to running, but even in his application, he thinks that it's that important to train them, even though they can't use the device with their skate on, because the whole sport specific thing is, it's not always the greatest. Just because you throw a skate on doesn't mean it's good for hockey. So
Right, right. It's one of those things where it's like we have to have an understanding of what the sport demands and requires for our training, but we can't go off the deep end with the sport specificity, right? Like I've seen some stuff on Instagram that I feel like coaches are just kind of making up for just clickbait, for lack of a better
yep,
way to put it, whereas they don't necessarily understand the overall like mechanics of the sprint. So for example, you mentioned about the importance of hitting the first position for the acceleration phase of the sprint. And I think that's essential, right? Understanding that acceleration and deceleration and the different phases of the sprint are going to look a little bit different. So understanding how we can train those specific
yep,
portions accordingly, because sometimes athletes struggle with one spot more than the other. Some guys are really great at producing power or accelerating, but they don't know how to hit the brakes, and the
yep,
deceleration component is a big issue for them. Or, in reality, a lot of injuries occur in a deceleration state. So maybe we should spend a little bit more time training that as well. And I think the other piece that gets interesting is from an isometric standpoint, like there are thousands of tendons in the body. And you're right, we often forget about or miss the tendons in the foot in particular. And
yep.
there's so many muscles in such a small area. So having the ability to train all of them quickly, easily, effectively, and really with a device that's pretty portable from what you showed me in
Yeah.
Baltimore that way is really
Yeah,
valuable.
it's like 12 by 12 and it's like 15 pounds or something. It's really not very big.
Yeah,
So,
you could throw that in a book bag if you had to.
oh yeah. Yeah, I've flown it on a plane before for sure.
Do you
So,
get any weird looks carrying that on a plane? Like,
yeah, I think so.
man, I'd love to see you just next time you travel with that, please whip that out in the airport and hit a
Yeah,
series
TSA loves it.
of
TSA.
ISOs and just
Yeah.
see what people say. But no, that's awesome. As far as like the programming side for the spring ankle,
Yeah.
what's sets, reps, parameters,
Yeah.
dosage? Walk me through how you apply this a little bit.
Yes, there's basically like 3 loading levels. So when you start out, you just do a 30 to 60-second isometric hold. And the key on it is you can't really get into the position of the knee over the toe on one leg without holding on to something. You can for 5 seconds, but for 40 seconds, good luck. People can't balance that well. So they hold a post. If they're at level 1, it's just body weight. Level 2, when they graduate from that, they hold the post with one hand and then they hold a free weight, a dumbbell or kettlebell or whatever in the other hand, usually between 40 and 100 pounds. And then after that, the third level is overcoming isometrics. So you actually take, like, we use a Spud Inc. Belt squat belt, and we would attach it to a utility pin, in the rack at the right height of the athlete, and then they would pull against it. But when you do the overcoming, you can only do it for 10 to 15 seconds max. And then the athletes will just, their ankles and actually, when you first get on it, your calf, I believe it would be the soleus, is really on fire because most people aren't training that very well. So people like almost cramp up if they haven't done it before. And then basically Cal claims that you either A, you can do all 8 positions and implement them 2 to 4 sets a week, or you can just choose like position 4 is change of direction drive. So if you're really bad at changing direction, you could do position 3, 4, and 6, and that is change of direction absorption, change of direction drive, and crossover landing. So you could do those 3 positions and work on it. One thing that uh, I've been working on is a way to better understand this because it's unique to us. We just came out with it, so the education side is huge. So what I've done is I've made this article or this in my article I have a chart and it has all the different 8 positions, what the positions are good for, and then how to achieve it. So like your big toe low, your heel high, and rotating out, and then so on and so forth. And then I also have a photo of each position and then how, so you can match it up. Because for the untrained eye, somebody who hasn't done it before, it's very easy to accidentally be doing position 3 instead of position 4, or so on and so forth. So we are trying to make these like printable like charts that you can put on the wall and just tell the kid do position 4, and then he can like figure it out on their own, or he or she. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you brought up so many amazing points there. I mean, first off, the concept of training the calf complex correctly. And that's something we're actually recording an entire podcast episode on next week, because you're right. I think so many people get it wrong. Like I mentioned before, we look at the amount of strength that the soleus muscle can produce, and we look at how people are loading it the majority of the time, and there's just a disconnect. If a muscle can exert 3,000 newtons of force, why am I just training it with like a bent knee body weight calf raise? That's not really doing anything for me at the end of the day. So having a good understanding of how to train it. Second off, I think, your point on the isometrics, going back to that again, that you can do with this thing, really the sky's the limit. But to your point, you have to know what you're doing, what you're training, and make sure you nail the setup, because the foot is so complex, not just from a muscular standpoint. I know we touched on that a second ago, but even from a joint articulation standpoint. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people forget mechanically, like we literally have a ball and socket joint in the foot. It's the talocalcaneal navicular joint. And it's like, we have so much movement in the foot complex between so many small little joints, that if you aren't paying attention and getting exactly what you're intending, you can very easily get something that works against what you're actually training for. So
Yeah.
certainly paying attention to those little details in this kind of area is really essential, I think, and making sure that your athletes really learn what you're trying to get from it. Because you're right, it's very easy to compensate or kind of drift off into a path that you might not want to go down from a training stimulus here.
Yeah. Well, so many times when we're training, we tell kids to put on shoes and they just put a cast on their foot, and then their foot just doesn't work well. Like, you know, every time I lift, I lift here in our showroom. So it's my own gym and everything, but I never lift with shoes on. And I train these kids, and the one kid's dad was like, yeah, what shoes should I buy him? I was like, tell him to show up in slides and he's going to lift in his socks every day. If we're doing upper body, if we're doing lower body, no matter what we're doing, there's no need to have shoes on unless you're doing Olympic weightlifting and you're at a high level and blah, blah, blah. But, it makes almost no sense to train with the shoe on, because you're just limiting all of the, your ankle is taking less force because of the support on the side and so on and so forth. That just, it doesn't make any sense to me to do all of our training in a shoe. Um, Even though we're playing the sport in a shoe because it's going to protect us, but yeah, it's just not ideal. So.
Yeah, no, not to mention just from a neural side of things too, proprioceptive input to the foot, right? Like the foot has some of the richest nerve endings in the body. So if we can actually get the foot in contact with the ground and feel that, that's going to change one, what we get from a muscle standpoint at the foot, but also everything up the chain from there as well. What happens at the higher up at the ankle, the lower leg, the knee, the hip, and so on that way. So I certainly agree with that. And I push people out of shoes quite often for training and rehab programs that way. And it's also the kind of thing too, where I get that question a lot myself, and everyone's always asking about, what the best shoe they could buy is, what shoes they should buy. But a lot of the quality assurance with that has gone out the window. A lot of it is made overseas, and the
Yep.
goal is profit margins because it's a publicly traded company that you're probably buying from. And the
Yep.
goal is not necessarily to produce something that's going to last and, actually provide what you're looking for. It's really just make money at the end of the day. And I think that there's something to be said about a company that kind of produces their stuff with more of a quality focus and keeps it a lot more locally that way, which I know you guys are pretty much all
Yep.
American made as well, correct?
Yeah. Yep. So we're in Newark, and then all of our Newark is a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. And then all of our manufacturing is done in the city, and then we transport everything back over to our warehouse. We have a contract with the local manufacturer that has all the fancy lasers and the powder coating and all those advanced processes. It's actually funny. We piggyback off of a lot of the same suppliers that Rogue would use with plastics and rubber and all that different stuff, because Columbus is kind of like Detroit used to be with cars, where there's us, there's Elite FTS, there's Rogue, there's Bodycraft. You got Bridge built down in Cincinnati. There's a lot of weightlifting manufacturers in Ohio. And it makes a West Side Barbell, all that. So
So Ohio is really the mecca for anything strength related that way.
yeah, especially equipment, like not obviously all the best ideas or the best athletes are coming out of here, but a lot of the best brands and, 3 out of the top 10 or whatever brands in the country are all in one city here, right in Columbus. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. What separates you and Stray Dog from the rest of the, I guess I'll call them competitors that way? What
Yeah.
sets you all apart that way?
Well, really, one thing that we say is like, a basic rack, every rack does squat, bench, and deadlift. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that my rack's going to do that better than yours, because, a bar cup is a bar cup. It holds everything the same. What we like to do is make unique solutions that handle space, and give the customer more options for flexibility down the road. So one thing we used to do, for example, we didn't have holes all over our racks. So our racks only had holes like where the bolts that we sell you are meant to go. So if you wanted to take our half rack and make it a double half rack, you had to, drill holes and maybe do some welding. It wasn't very easy. Now there's just holes everywhere. Everything's bolted together. So you can make a half rack, a double half rack. You could split a double half rack in two, grab some more uprights and make them, two separate racks and all of that. Another thing that we can do is we can put cable machines inside of the half rack without increasing the footprint. So you could have like a functional trainer inside of a half rack, and or a lat pull down or a belt squat lat pull down combo. So we just did like Bucknell University. They have 24 lifting stations, 24 or 12 lat pull downs and 12 cable columns, all in the same footprint because the racks have the machines inside of them. So really it's managing space.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such an excellent point is, a lot of times when we're building out facilities, we have a very tight footprint. And a lot of times, we can save space by going with a smaller physical size facility. So if we can fit more or the same amount of equipment in a smaller facility, then it kind of saves us money in the long run that way.
Oh, of course.
And one of the big things that I remember seeing from you guys that way was the jammer arms. And I distinctly
Yeah.
remember how they actually fold up and slide up, which I've never
Yep.
actually seen before in anyone else that way. But from a, space saving standpoint that way, I really liked that because now I can have jammer arms on the rack. And then if I'm not going to use them, they literally
Yeah.
just slide up out of the way. And I don't have to worry about them for anything else from a training standpoint.
Yeah, what's really cool about that, Dan, is when you have they're called the Alpha Arms is our brand on them. When you pin them up out of the way, they're actually at the perfect angle for triphasic jumps. So you can put your bands on there and do your assisted jumps, because we go to all these schools and they'll have triphasic arms and they'll have lever arms, and that's a lot of extra money not doing a lot of stuff. Triphasic jumps are in your program once a week, maybe. So when you're not using the lever arms, you can get them up out of the way. You can throw bands on them. You can even have like really tall guys do pull-ups. You know, you have like a 6'3" guy. He doesn't have to tuck his knees. Yeah, but the really cool thing also about those arms is they're free motion. So when we unlock them, there's a pin on the front of the upright. It can go 180 degrees to the side and the front and the back. So you can do movements like a chest fly, or you can do like a converging press. And you don't have to be really wide because I'm pretty small. I'm only 5'8", 185. So when I get on like normal, like a rogue lever arm, it feels like I'm pressing like out away from my body, just because I'm not the right width. So when you have the ability to unlock them, you can move them in whatever motion plane that you want. And it just feels a lot better. And it actually makes you fight to do, like, you have to control it. So instead of just pushing and then it comes back, you have to actually control it, kind of more like a free weight.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And, from your point on space saving and just allowing freedom in the weight room that way, if you can literally move and rotate in any plane with that, then, you can hit so many different movements in a short amount of time. And I see a lot of strength coaches. I feel like I hear a lot about this 1x20 approach lately where, hey, we're going to get freshmen who come in. We're going to get, our new group of athletes come in and we're going to just throw a ton of movements at them. They're going to do one set of 20 of everything. And we're just going to expose them to a variety of different movement patterns. So it's like, if that's my goal, to just, expand the athlete's movement vocabulary and movement IQ, then having the ability to literally switch between one movement to the next, to the next, to the next in seconds is really, really valuable, because then I can get more, stimuli in a, shorter amount of time or a set amount of time that way. So I think that, the possibilities for exercise pairings or just overall how many different variations of something you can get in a single session
Yeah.
really expand when you talk about having that freedom of movement that way.
Yeah, it also really increases the amount of time that you save, because if you can do multiple movements at one station and you don't have to move the athletes all the way around the weight room, they're less distracted. Our head salesman Nick always says that it's a station and you shouldn't look at it as just a squat rack, because if you can only squat there, you're wasting all of your space there. You need to be able to do, your glute hams, your split squats, maybe even storing. We have power block mounts. You can store your dumbbells right at the rack. And now you can have one person doing squats, one person doing dumbbell rows, or whatever it is that you need that day. So
No, that's awesome. And it's interesting on this concept of facility design as well. I think it's one of those things where, I talk with people all the time, and a lot of times they put a lot of time and planning into laying out their facility. And then 3 or 4 years later, it just doesn't meet their needs anymore. And then they're redoing everything, spending tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, to redo their entire facility design and layout and bring in all new equipment that way. So, based on your experience that way, what mistakes do you typically see coaches or strength facilities making when it comes to their facility design that way? Where are people going wrong? And
yeah,
what is kind of the solution to some of these issues that you see?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that we see is people trying to get like too fancy, and they try to get too many of this machine or too many of this, and they don't just get broad enough of everything. So if you buy two belt squats and you have 60 athletes, good luck getting them through those belt squats. So one principle, we were working with West Liberty University, and Dan Hopkins, their strength coach, he likes to pair his weight room in groups of 6. So he has 18 squat racks paired into 3 different groups. And for each different group, it has its own set of machines. So one group has mid rows, one group has lat pull downs, and one group has GHD reverse hyper combos. So they rotate, they'll stay at their same rack, but then the athletes will rotate through the different machines and do it that way. So one thing that we've been doing a lot recently is, not going ahead and selling them, 10 cable machines and then giving them the option to buy them later. Because our half racks, all of our double half racks and our half racks, they can put in the cable attachments after the fact. So you don't have to buy everything at one time, because sometimes people bite off more than they can chew and they think that they're going to use all this stuff. And then they get in there and they realize it's not really possible. So, we all of our stuff's not returnable. It's all made to order. So we like to make sure that everybody's going to be happy with what they get when they get it. So we do a lot of the 3D renderings and the mock-ups to show them exactly, how it's going to look and how it's going to flow. And then we actually use an equation. It's basically the amount of athletes you want to train, the amount of time you have divided by the number of stations. And then we use that to figure out, how exactly to lay out the room. So
Interesting. Yeah. So what does that come out to with that equation? How many athletes do you typically have per like rack station set up that
it's
way?
depending on how they train, it's 3 to 5. 5 is really the max. In the 5 settings, you're using more of like the beam connectors. So for example, we can do the racks as narrow as 5 feet, but we like to do them connected at 8 feet. If you connect them at 8 feet, you can have a person squatting here, a person squatting here, and somebody doing pull-ups in the middle on the connector between the racks. And that really opens up a lot more. You really just open up another station. Another way we're able to create more space at the station and train 5 kids at a time is our bench has attachment holes. I don't know if you remember me showing you that.
Yep.
Yeah, so like you could put your split squat pad on there or your landmine or whatever attachment you need. You can put them on the bottom of your bench and then you can use it away from the rack. And then you don't have to clutter up your rack with all of your attachment work. So,
Yeah, I think that's a huge point to kind of hit on as well is I think the freedom that this allows from a facility design standpoint is huge because a lot of the times you're right, everything attaches to the rack. And,
yep.
Don't get me wrong, I know a lot of your stuff attaches to the rack as well, but you have the freedom to attach stuff to the bench,
Yep.
or there's enough space in between where you can do stuff in between the racks while people are using a barbell on either side of you. And I
We
think,
actually have another system called the ATR, which stands for auxiliary training, and they're basically cable machines. So I have a cable column, a lat pull down, a belt squat lat pull down combo, and then a frame that's just like an empty one. And what
yep,
those are is we usually do like 4 lat pull downs or 3 lat pull downs and 2 cable columns, and we'll put dumbbells in the back. And then when you're not using them as cables, you can actually take the lat seat off and then you can put your attachment on. So we make the machines out of the same parts that we make our racks out of. So you can have another place to train and not just clutter up your racks because attachments are great, but you can only use, one attachment on a rack at a time. And if the attachment's being used, you can't lift there. So there's always a give and a take.
yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And it seems to me like y'all have thought this out so well. Again, going back to where the coaching mind met the engineering mind, where this, has kind of stemmed from that way. And that's something I don't always see. I see a lot of
Yeah.
times, like I said, people put the equipment in and it's just kind of, put it wherever you can, fill the space. And there's not necessarily a framework used to design the space. And I think that, in today's day and age in particular, having a well thought out facility can really make or break the success, especially in the private world.
Oh,
Everyone
for sure.
has nice racks nowadays. Everyone is doing stuff online. So, you have to stand out somehow. And if your facility is well put together, well thought out, and allows you to do so much stuff in a very small amount of space, then that's going to set you apart from everyone else.
For sure.
Now, I know we were talking before a little bit as well, Jake, that you've kind of been through the ringer yourself from like a shoulder and overall like health and injury standpoint,
Yeah.
and some of the different work that you've been able to do, from the strength and conditioning side has really made a difference for you. Walk me through what all, you had going on that way
Yeah.
and how you've gotten to this point where you're actually not as concerned about your shoulder anymore.
Yeah. So growing up, I played football, I wrestled, and I played lacrosse. So I was in 3 sports all the time, not a lot of breaks. When there was a break, I'd be training at our gym. And I've dislocated my left shoulder 25 times, unfortunately. And
25 times.
yeah, so I had labrum surgery on it when I was in high school, and I dislocated it probably 10 times before then. And then after I had labrum surgery, I dislocated it 15 more times because the surgery didn't really work. So they did what's called a ladder J, where they reconstruct the shoulder socket. So I had that one done in 2021. And actually, right before that, on my right shoulder, I had the labrum done as well. So I've had the labrum done on both sides. The right labrum repair was great. It was fine because I've never actually dislocated. It was more of an overuse because I'm right-handed injury. And then my left shoulder, I just destroyed the bone. Um, I have been fortunate to be able to be in the we're right here in Columbus where Ohio State is, and they have a pretty good rehab facility. But the first two people that I went to there weren't super knowledgeable. The one girl, she was, she wasn't into lifting at all. And whenever I get a PT that doesn't lift on their own, I'm always like questioning, like, are you sure you're going to help me out? Like, I don't really believe you. Cause like, I'm not that I'm a crazy freak athlete, but I'm not like a regular gym pop guy that hurt his shoulder at his office, at his, doing his construction job. Like I have more goals and I'm going to try harder than them. So, don't put me on the same, like we were talking about before, 3 sets of 10 on everything. Like that's bullshit. I'm not doing that. So I kind of did like a combination of rehab, yoga, and just straight up lifting. So as soon as I was able to start doing like dumbbell rows and face pulls and all the upper body movements, I just started going on them very hard. I think the main thing that has helped my shoulders, I actually play box lacrosse. I actually have practice tonight at 6:30. Um, I've been playing now since my surgery. This is my second season. I've never hurt it, and it doesn't even hurt when I play. And I think the reasoning is because I've really built up the whole girdle in my back and my shoulder. We actually invented this tool called the scap strap with this professional baseball player, and I use that a lot combined with the yoga. I really think the isometric holds on the downward dog, on the upward dog, even just like the plank holds, I think that is really increased my shoulder strength more than, all of the band exercises and all of the whatever jazz they do have you do at physical therapy. Not that, they obviously had to get me up to a point where at the beginning, I had to listen to them so I could go from 0 to 25% or whatever. But once I was at about 50%, I really started to almost ignore what they were saying because it wasn't effective enough. They weren't giving me enough. They were like afraid to hurt me, which I understand, but it's kind of frustrating when all you want to do is get better as fast as possible. And you're willing to do 2.5 hours of rehab a day, and they're only giving you 30 minutes of stretching. And you're like, well, I can do more. So yeah.
Yeah, you bring up so many great points here, and it's interesting because, I kind of sit on that physical therapy side of things, and I meet people every day who are very frustrated by their past experience from a physical therapy standpoint. And I certainly feel like a lot of people feel that the general physical therapy approach has been a huge disservice to the athletic population. They don't
Yep.
they don't feel like their PTs understand the demands of their sport or the demands of lifting or whatever they're trying to get back to. And to kind of plug that a little bit more, you mentioned that you grew up playing football, injured it then, and now you're playing box lacrosse. And I'm sure someone listening is going to say, okay, what the hell is box lacrosse? And there's a lot of contact involved. And there's not a whole lot of
Basically hockey.
pads and protections
No.
that I've seen. And it's interesting because I see a lot of injuries from box lacrosse. It's incredibly intense, incredibly fast paced, very fun to watch. But your basic 3 sets of 10 band IR, ER is not going to cut it for that. We really have to push people a little bit harder because the sport itself is going to, literally break you if you're not built for it.
Yep.
So I think that your points on, you mentioned face pulls and rows and so on that way. I mean, it sounds like a lot of scap stability. I mean, hence the
Oh yeah.
reason you literally named your product the scap
Yeah.
strap. I think a lot of people forget that the shoulder joint is literally the shoulder blade, so scapula, articulating with the humeral head and a few other joints as well. But the stability of the scapula in particular is often neglected and overlooked.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, you can't fire a cannon out of a canoe. So if you're not stable proximally, forget everything else distally that way.
Oh, of
And I,
course.
again, I think it's so easy to just spam, your external rotation, your IR, and just crush rotator cuff. But, all of those muscles attached to the scap. So if you're not building stability at the scap itself, then how much is that going to matter? And how much of a difference is that going to make at the
Yeah.
end of the day?
Yeah, I actually have a video on the scap strap where I took his name's Greg Williams. He calls himself a movement specialist, and he drew the different subscapularis, all the different muscles on the back and the shoulder girdle, and he drew them on them. And then while the guy was doing the different exercises with the scap strap, he was explaining and pointing out to it and what they all are. It's a pretty unique video. It took me a lot of time to make that one, but um it's really cool when you're able to actually see what's going on, because the athlete is shirtless and we painted his back and you can actually see everything moving. And it makes a lot more sense when you can understand it being told to you and with the visual representation. I'm a more visual person. So
Yeah, no, that's absolutely incredible. And something again, on the PT side for a second, I feel like a lot of times people get given exercises, but they don't know what they're actually doing or why they're doing it or how to cue it. And having something like that to literally see in real time what you're doing and what it's working, I think connects the dots for people a lot
oh yeah.
more. Because I think the more you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it's going to help you get back to what you're trying to get back to, the more bought in you're going to be and the more successful your overall
Yeah.
rehab is going to be. At the end of the day, we have to keep the main thing the main thing. And you probably don't care to be the best at stretching. You probably just want to get back to throwing weight around and hitting people.
Yep. Actually, the best PT that I ever had, he would bring in the model of the scapularis with the little bones and the ligaments, and he would move it and articulate and be like, "This is what you're doing today," and it just I bought into it 10 times the fold because of that. I'm not going to take your word for it just because you're telling me that. Like I'm not, I need convinced. So
Yeah, and I think that's something, again, we see that in a lot of people nowadays. People are a little bit more skeptical than they used to be, and people are questioning more. They're getting second opinions. And, I'm not opposed to any of that. I think it's good and healthy at the end of the day. But, at the end of the day, you have to know your stuff and you have to provide the best you can for the person in front of you. And if you're not able to do that, for whatever reason, whether that's, hey, the system I'm in says I have to see 4 patients an hour, or, hey, I
mhm.
just don't care that much, or whatever it is, like, you really have to rethink what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think.
Yeah, I think the time thing it's horrible. I mean, obviously, time is money, but when you're with the PT and they're like, you have 20 minutes, and you're like, I think this is more important than 20 minutes once a week. Like this seems like to me, like I should be doing this for 2 hours at a time. Like I don't understand why the appointments are so short. So
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And the other thing you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that you did some yoga type stuff as well. And it's interesting because usually I don't hear people who have grown up playing football and lacrosse doing yoga. So where did
yeah,
that inspiration come from for you, Jake?
honestly, I just wanted to I wanted my shoulder to get better, and I was thinking like, uh, I can't do real weightlifting yet, and I'm doing all this stretching, but the stretching I'm doing is like just for my shoulder and it's not making me stronger, it's just stretching. So I was doing a deep dive on the internet and I found this guy named Breathe and Flow on YouTube, and he practices what's called a vinyasa flow. So it's a little bit more like power yoga. It's not as much stretching. Like he does what's called a chaturanga, which is basically like a push up where you don't touch your chest all the way to the bottom. And the reason I bought into his stuff is because, just like you were saying, he's not just a yoga guy. He does jujitsu. He's a black belt in jujitsu. So I always like people that have multiple disciplines, because it's like the thing with the samurai. You see the way in one thing, you see it in all things. You see it broader, or whatever the quote is. That's kind of how I am, and I think that you know people have a negative aspect when they think of yoga because they think about some guy wearing like beads and like flowers and stuff, but really I think yoga is much all you're doing is the difference between yoga and regular movement is the breathing and the stretching. And I really think I've applied the different breath techniques from yoga over to my actual weightlifting and like in lacrosse. And actually, I do it when I shoot my bow, when I do archery. And it's helped me immensely. And the kids that I coach in lacrosse, I think they're sick of me hearing it, but I always I text them these links like, do this yoga, do this yoga. And a couple of our better players have bought into it and they're better in like crunch time because they have the breathing system down and they can calm themselves down. So I really like yoga, not even just for the stability aspect that it helped my shoulders, but really mentally, it's helped my lifting, it's helped my running. I feel like I'm in better shape, and I know I'm not in better shape than I was 3 years ago, just because I'm more efficient in my breathing.
No,
So,
I think that's a huge point. And I mean, hence the reason you see military guys doing it all the
oh
time.
yeah,
Like they don't do things in the military that don't work.
no,
And
they
they're
don't have time
doing
for
that.
that.
Yeah, they're doing that regularly. And we actually just recorded not too long ago a podcast with Luke and Andrew from ISO Kapnick on that
Mhm.
respiration side of things. And I mean, plain and simple, over 80% of athletes have been shown to have performance limitations because of their breathing.
Oh
At the
yeah,
end of the day, if you can't breathe, if you can't clear out the metabolic waste products like carbon dioxide that accumulate in response to exercise, then you're limiting what you could be doing from a performance standpoint. So
that was
the
one thing
better,
you just said about the breathing out. I think
yep,
people don't understand that. They
yeah.
breathe in and they don't breathe out. And if you don't exhale, like you should almost be exhaling until you feel like you're going to faint and then breathe in more air. Because if you don't, you're sitting there with I don't know the exact term, but it's like stale air in your head and it's not doing anything.
Everyone
So,
thinks that breathing is all about pulling oxygen in,
yep,
which I mean, to a point, that's important, but
that's
we
only
also
half
have
of
to
it.
get rid of carbon dioxide that builds up in the body. And I think
Yep.
that people often forget about that. And it's interesting because physiologically, carbon dioxide level is the primary driver for respiration. It's not low oxygen, it's high CO2.
Yeah.
So if we can't expel that, then we're going to have more of it in our body and our performance is going to drop. So actually taking the time and paying attention to these things can make a huge difference in performance, just like we started talking about at the foot and ankle at the start with the little spring ankle device. That way,
Yeah.
pairing something like that with a breathing thing is super easy, right? If you're going to crush your ISO hold, do your box breathing or whatever technique you like while you're doing that and just knock out two birds, one stone at the same time.
Yeah, Cal Dietz actually just published a new article that's like the neuro stack, and it's a way that you basically tilt your head back. You do 3 deep inhales, and then you exhale 3 sharp times, and it basically like resets you. And you're supposed to do it like between a free throw or between 2 sets of heavy back squat or whenever you need to just bring yourself down a little bit. So the whole breath thing is, I think, very interesting and often like just very overlooked. And you I always tell the kids that I coach, don't be mouth breathers because you're sitting there and you're seeing them just, and you're like, guys, you need to slow it down, fill up your diaphragm and all that. So,
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and it's interesting because, like you mentioned, you have that coaching background that way yourself, and you've been in the strength and conditioning, and you've been in the PT space as a patient per se, and had some mixed experience that way. And sometimes our athletes get injured and get hurt, which
yeah.
is inevitable. If you're playing football and all of a sudden a 230-pound linebacker decides to drive his head through your knee and blows the whole thing up, like there's only so much we can do to prevent that. So when one of your kids does, hopefully not, but does go down with an injury, what kind of things do you look for from like a rehab provider to send them to that way? What kind of things do you value and look to like recommend on that side of things?
Yeah, really the main values that I hold are kind of what I was saying earlier. Like, are you a PT or are you a strength coach that has their certification that's also a PT? Because I look at those very differently. The kids that I usually send my athletes to the guy I mentioned before. His name's Greg Williams. We basically call him the healer. Literally in like 4 or 5 weeks, he usually fixes whatever the issue that people have. So I usually just send people to him, or if they can afford Eric Serrano, he's in town too. So I'll send him over to Eric. But I really don't like guys who their PT clinic looks like a rubber band factory and it doesn't look like a weight room. So
I'm so glad you brought that up because, we talked earlier about the space saving design that you can kind of develop with the stray dog products that way. And that applies to more than just strength and conditioning settings. That same thing can be applied from a PT side of things as well. Like there's no rule that says a PT clinic can't have a squat rack or 8. There's no rule that says, hey, your PT clinic can't have weight sleds or like 3 of them. So I certainly think that the more we kind of blur those lines between PT and strength and conditioning, the better our outcomes and the better our results are going to be. And I mean, plain and simple, a lot of clinics are willing to spend over 50 grand on a freaking Alter G treadmill. Why are they not willing to spend 15 grand on something that,
Yep.
I feel is a little bit more valuable and I would use a lot more? Or on top of that, the amount of clinics I've been in that have multiple towers of, these two, three, $4,000 ultrasound units, which, yeah, maybe there's a time and a place for it, but I don't do ultrasound clinically. I haven't done it in years because I don't see a whole lot of value in it. And there's actually research that shows it makes certain conditions like adhesive capsulitis potentially worse. So why am I
Hmm.
going to spend thousands of dollars on something that's not going to move the needle in the right direction when I could spend the money on stuff that has been documented to be effective for decades, and there's not really
I
a
think
whole
one of
lot
the
of
main
disputing it.
problems Yeah, I think one of the main problems that we see is a lot of the PT places are owned by hospitals or they're owned by a bigger system. So they don't have a lot of freedom on what they're allowed to buy. They have a contract with Techno Gym and they have a contract with this company and that company, and they have to take, whatever stuff the PT list has on it and they just buy it and they don't really even it doesn't even really matter to them. And that's
It's
when you don't see the stuff looking like you see it looking like a cardio room with a bunch of treadmills and stuff instead of like a weight room, like your facilities look like.
Yeah, and
So
it's so interesting that you bring that up because, people hear like hospital system and they immediately think older population. Well, I think that weightlifting and exercise is safe and really effective in adults. So why are
oh
we so afraid to do it? And, even just something as simple as your spring ankle device, like there's literally some research coming out now that intrinsic toe strength, like they literally have a isometric test for toe strength apparently, is correlated with longevity. So how strong your foot is, which I think that makes sense, right? Like we talked about before, all movement, whether it's walking or changing direction or sprinting or even just maintaining balance, starts from the foot. So if you can maintain good foot strength, then you're literally able to potentially live longer. So why are we not designing our systems
I've
or
always read that one of
our,
the biggest like indicators of longevity of life is grip strength.
right?
Like,
So
you're falling, you got to be able to grab something, like that kind of thing. So it makes sense for older populations to lift.
it does. It does. I feel like we've covered so much ground on a variety of different topics today, Jake. I mean, I feel like you give us, 2, 3 more hours and we could probably solve half the world's problems at this rate. But for people who want to find out more about you and what you all are doing at Stray Dog or reach
Yeah.
out about different things or questions that way, where can they find you all at?
Yeah, the best place would just be our website, straydogstrength.com. And then I run all of our social medias, straydog_strength on Instagram. And then I have my own page. It's called Stray Dog Jake. And yeah, we post, multiple times a week trying to, half pictures of products that we make. And then we try to do half education or at least 25%. So we're not just all putting out products. I try to, partner up with guys like Eric Serrano and Cal Dietz and all these strength coaches and performance guys and try to get some different ideas out there. So
Yeah, and I also really like, I think you tend to share a lot of like your prototype things or like inside looks at what you guys are working on and
yeah,
developing. And I always think that's cool to kind of see what's on the cutting edge or what's coming soon, so to speak.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool. We have a small engineering team, and we work really hard, and we've made about 200 products in 3 or 4 years, and we're just getting started. So it's very
Yeah, no,
exciting.
that's awesome. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there. Jake, this is awesome, man. I really appreciate your time and love talking shop with you about anything and everything.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me, Dan.